The anonymous envelope arrived at my architectural firm in Chicago on a Tuesday morning. A plain manila intruder amidst the sleek blueprints and laser-cut acrylic models. It was jarring in its cheapness. A smudge of analog anonymity in my world of digital precision and clean lines. Inside, there was no letter. Only a single, black USB drive and a yellow sticky note with 3 words hastily scrawled in block letters. Listen to this. My world. A structure I had meticulously designed and built on a foundation of hard work and logic, was about to suffer a catastrophic structural failure. My name is Evelyn. I'm 32. And until that moment, I believed the quiet, substantial checks I sent home each month were the steel reinforcements holding my family together. I was about to find out they were merely the materials for my own cage. I stared at the drive. My mind, trained to assess risk and structural integrity, cycling through possibilities. Was it a disgruntled former client? A piece of corporate espionage? I almost threw it away, dismissing it as a prank. But something in the starkness of the message held me captive. I took the drive to my private office, overlooking the steel and glass canyons of the Loop, and locked the door. My hands felt unnaturally cold as I slid the drive into my laptop's USB port. I slipped on my noise-canceling headphones, and the bustling city outside my window fell away into absolute silence. I clicked on the single audio file. The first sounds were achingly familiar, the faint, tinkling chime of the bell on the front door of the Gilded Page, our family's historic bookstore in a small Wisconsin town, followed by the soft creak of an old floorboard. It was the soundscape of my childhood. Then, the voices began. So clear it was as if they were sitting right beside me in my sterile, minimalist office. She sent the quarterly payment. My mother's voice, thin and reedy, began. Right on time. As always. Good old, reliable Evelyn. The praise was a thin veneer over a layer of something else. Something I could never quite name, but it always felt. A cynical laugh followed, sharp and grating. It was my younger brother. Leo. Reliable. She's obligated. Don't act like she's doing us some grand favor. We raised her. We fed her. We sent her to that fancy architecture school. This is just her paying us back. It's the least she can do. The words hit me like a physical blow. I flinched, my hand flying to my chest as if to stop the impact. Obligated. The word echoed in the silent space of my headphones. I thought of the trip to Milan I'd canceled 2 years ago to free up the cash to pay their property tax bill. I thought of the bonus I'd earned on the Prescott Tower project. A bonus that went not to a down payment on my own home, but directly to them to cover a business loan Leo had defaulted on. She owes us. My mother's voice affirmed on the recording, the contempt in her tone now sharp and unmistakable. She sits in her glass tower in Chicago, playing with her little models, while Leo is here on the front lines, keeping our family's legacy alive. 3 years ago, the Gilded Page, a legacy from my grandparents, was drowning in debt. Weeks away from being seized by the bank, Leo's management and my father's passive refusal to intervene had run it into the ground. They had come to me, their faces etched with the shame of failure. They had pleaded. So I'd acted. My financial advisor, Maria, and I created the Veritas Trust, a blind LLC designed to purchase the bookstore's debts and restructure its finances. My family was told a private equity firm specializing in heritage businesses had stepped in. Impressed by the store's potential, they made a small, manageable payment each month to the trust, believing they were satisfying a benevolent, anonymous investor. They had no idea that I, their daughter, was that investor, supplementing their meager payments with thousands of my own dollars every single month to keep the lights on and the creditors at bay. I did it to save their pride, to preserve the fiction that they were still in control. The worst part was my father's voice, the one that had once read me bedtime stories and taught me how to draw a perfect floor plan. His quiet, weary agreement. Your mother's right. Son, Evelyn never understood what it means to be part of a community. To run a real business. It's better this way. She helps from a distance. And we don't have to deal with her. Intensity. Intensity. That was their word for my ambition. My focus. My refusal to let their dreamy incompetence drag me down. It was the quality that had allowed me to build a life, a career, and the very fortune they were now living on. I ripped the headphones off, the silence of my office suddenly deafening and suffocating. I stared at the spreadsheets on my second monitor, the ones detailing every wire transfer, every debt payment, every quiet act of salvation. Over 3 years, I had funneled more than $300, 000, into that bookstore, into their lives. The numbers weren't just data, they were years of my life, quantified and dismissed. The initial shock, the searing pain of their words, began to recede, replaced by a cold, structural anger. My hands, which should have been shaking, were perfectly steady as I pulled up the encrypted folder containing the original contract for the Veritas Trust. My advisor, a shrewd woman named Maria, had insisted on a particular clause, one I'd thought was overly cynical at the time. I remembered the conversation vividly. "Evelyn, this is a beautiful gesture," she had said, "but compassion needs a firewall. We're building one in." I scrolled through the dense legal text until I found it. Article 9, Section B, the Gross Mismanagement Clause. It stated that if clear evidence of continued financial incompetence or malfeasance was found, the Veritas Trust had the unilateral right to immediately assume full operational control and ownership of the business. Maria had called it a ripcord. I now saw it for what it was, a blueprint for justice. My family saw me as an obligation, a debt to be collected. They were about to learn that every debt, eventually, comes due. For a long time after the recording ended, I just sat there, encased in the silence of my office. The initial wave of cold, structural anger was followed by something far more corrosive, a deep, aching grief. My entire relationship with my family, a structure I had thought was flawed but fundamentally sound, was a facade. I had been propping up a condemned building, and the inhabitants were mocking me for it. My first instinct, the one born from 32 years of being the family peacekeeper, was to erase the evidence. My hand moved the mouse, the cursor hovering over the audio file. I could delete it. I could pretend I never heard it. I could send the next quarterly payment, swallow the pain, and maintain the fragile, artificial peace. The guilt was a physical weight, a sense of shame for having listened, for having uncovered their private, ugly thoughts. It felt like a betrayal, even though I was the one who had been betrayed. But I stopped. Their voices echoed in my head. She owes us. What a joke. The least she can do. They had written me off as an obligation, a walking, talking bank account with no feelings to consider. To delete the file would be to agree with their assessment that my feelings, my sacrifices, didn't matter. It would be the ultimate act of self-negation. With a steady hand, I moved the file into a new, encrypted folder, titled Project Veritas. The time for keeping their peace was over. The time for finding my own had begun. My architect's mind took over, demanding order from the emotional chaos. I needed a complete blueprint of the situation. I spent the rest of the day poring over the financial records of the Veritas Trust, cross-referencing them with my personal bank statements. The numbers painted a stark, brutal picture. The bookstore's operating expenses and debt service required approximately $12, 000, a month. The payment my family made to the trust, the one they grumbled about, was a mere $1. Lambe. For 3 years, I had been quietly covering the $10, 800 difference, every single month. For every dollar they grudgingly paid, I had secretly contributed 9 more. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. I had not been helping them stay afloat. I had been single-handedly carrying them. Now, I had to identify the source of the leak. The USB drive was a dead end, wiped of all metadata. But the sender had wanted to be found. I went back to the original manila envelope, which I'd almost thrown away. Tucked into the bottom corner, almost invisible, was a tiny, handwritten string of characters, a Proton mail address, unencrypted, anonymous email service. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a deliberate, risky communication. I composed a short, cautious email. I received your package. I've listened to the file. Who is this? I signed it simply with my initial, E. The reply came less than an hour later. I hoped you would understand. My name is Arthur Miller. I have been the manager of the Gilded Page for 40 years. I knew your grandparents well. What is happening to their legacy is a crime. Can we meet? I have more to show you. Mr. Miller. A quiet gentleman with ink-stained fingers who had been a fixture of my entire life. He had taught me how to properly care for old leather-bound books and always slipped me an extra cookie from the shop's cafe when I was a child. His loyalty, I realized, was not to my parents, but to the bookstore itself and to the memory of its founders. We met 2 days later in the hushed reading room of the Chicago Public Library, a neutral ground, far from the politics of my family. He looked older than I remembered, the weight of his conscience etched into the lines on his face. He carried a worn, leather-bound ledger, the kind the shop had used for a century. Evelyn, he began, his voice a pained whisper. I'm sorry to be the one to do this, but I watched your grandparents build that store into a pillar of the community. Now I watch your brother treat it like his personal piggy bank. He slid the ledger across the table. Your father stopped looking at the books years ago. He trusts Leo completely. But Leo, he's careless. And he's a thief. I opened the ledger. It wasn't just a record of sales and expenses. It was a diary of deceit, annotated with Mr. Miller's meticulous, spidery handwriting. He pointed to a column. Inventory shrinkage. Leo claims it's shoplifting, but it's always the rare, first edition books that go missing. The ones that can be sold privately for cash. He flipped a few pages. Unreceipted withdrawals from the cash register. Always small amounts. Always on a Friday. He calls it marketing expenses. And this, he said, his finger landing on a series of payments to a graphic design company I'd never heard of. I looked them up. The company is registered to his girlfriend. He's been paying her for promotional materials we never receive. It was embezzlement. Not on a grand scale, but a steady, parasitic draining of the bookstore's lifeblood. This was the concrete evidence I needed. The gross mismanagement clause in the trust contract wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was a clear and present reality, documented in black and white. Me lingering guilt, my fear of being the one to tear the family apart, evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They weren't just ungrateful. They were actively destroying the very legacy I was bankrupting myself to save. Mr. Miller had given me the final piece of my blueprint. Now, it was time to build. The call came on a Thursday evening, a week after my meeting with Mr. Prided. Miller. It was my mother. Her voice a carefully constructed blend of warmth and casualness. Evelyn. Honey, we were just thinking of you. Leo has had such a wonderful idea for the bookstore. And we'd love for you to come home this weekend so we can all discuss it together. A proper family dinner. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, the Chicago skyline glittering like a web of captured stars behind me. I knew exactly what this was. The wonderful idea was a pretext. This was the next phase of their plan, the pitch, followed by the demand. For a fleeting second, the old exhaustion washed over me, the weary resignation of a daughter who just wanted her family to be normal. I was tempted to refuse, to activate the trust's clause right then and there, and end it all. But my analyst's mind cautioned against it. An architect never demolishes a structure without a complete survey. I needed to see the full extent of the rot for myself. I'd love to. Mom, I said, my voice a perfect replica of the dutiful daughter they expected. I can drive down on Saturday. I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. The performance began the moment I walked through the door of my childhood home. The house, which was technically an asset of the Gilded Page, and therefore partially mine. I felt alien to me. My mother enveloped me in a hug that felt both desperate and cloying. Her perfume a familiar scent that now seemed tinged with deceit. My father clapped me on the shoulder. His bonhomie forced and loud. "There's my successful girl," he boomed, making the family proud. Leo, however, was the star of the show. He was practically vibrating with a manic, rehearsed energy. He had charts. He had graphs. He'd even created a cheap-looking PowerPoint presentation. He sat me down in the living room, the same room where my father had once praised my meticulous childhood drawings, and launched into his grand vision. "So, Ev," he began, trying to sound like a seasoned CEO. "The bookstore is stable now, thanks to our investor." He had the audacity to wink at me, as if we were in on some joke together. But stability is stagnation. I'm thinking bigger. I'm thinking a cultural hub. For the next 20 minutes. He laid out a plan, so full of buzzwords and devoid of substance, it was almost a parody. He wanted to add a curated artisanal coffee bar, host influencer-led poetry slams, and launch a subscription box service for vintage paperbacks. It was a patchwork of trendy ideas he'd likely gleaned from the internet. With no understanding of the bookstore's actual customer base or profit margins. "It's a brilliant plan. Isn't it?" my mother gushed when he finished, looking at me expectantly. "It's ambitious," I said carefully, choosing my words like an architect selecting load-bearing beams. "A project of this scale would require significant capital investment." "Exactly," my father jumped in, sliding a piece of paper across the coffee table. "It was a crudely drafted budget. We're projecting we'll need about $100,000 to get it off the ground. We thought we'd ask the trust. Through you. Of course. For the family." I looked at the number. 100,000,000. Ling ling ling. It was an amount clearly chosen to sound substantial, but achievable for their investor. I pretended to study the budget, my mind cold and clear. "This is very impressive," I said, my voice a mask of professional consideration. "I can't make any promises." "Of course. The trust has very strict protocols. But I will present this to them on Monday. They'll need to see a more detailed business plan." Naturally. The relief in the room was palpable. They had gotten what they wanted: my compliance. The rest of the dinner was a blur of false praise and cloying affection. As we were finishing dessert, I excused myself. "I think I left my reading glasses in the car," I said. A simple, "Believably." I didn't go to my car. I slipped down the hallway to my father's study. The door left conveniently ajar. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm. And I listened. "She bought it," Leo said, his voice a triumphant hiss. "Hook, line, and sinker." "Of course she did. Dear," my mother cooed. "She can't say no when we talk about family." Then, my father's voice, low and conspiratorial. "It doesn't matter if the trust gives us the full 100,000. We only need 50. I had my lawyer. Bill. Look at the trust agreement again." He found it. A capital infusion buyout clause. If the business secures a new capital investment of 50,000 or more, we have the option to buy out the initial investor's entire stake for the original debt value plus a 20% premium. My blood ran cold. The irony was breathtaking. They were planning to use my own money to get rid of me. They would take my investment, trigger the buyout clause, and seize control of the bookstore. Free and clear of the benefactor they so clearly resented. It's perfect, Leo crowed. We use her money to cut her out completely. And the best part is, she'll be the one arranging it. My mother and Leo left the study then, their laughter echoing down the hall. But my father remained. I heard the clink of a glass as he poured himself a drink. Then, a heavy sigh. I peeked through the crack in the door. He was standing in front of a framed photo on his desk, a picture of Leo and me as children. He stared at it for a long moment, then muttered to the empty room, his voice thick with a strange mix of resentment and despair. This has to work, he whispered. It's his last chance. He can't fail again. He's not strong like her. The confession, meant for no one, was the most honest thing I had ever heard him say. His actions weren't born of pure greed, but of a deep, pathetic fear that his son was a failure. He was sacrificing his capable daughter on the altar of his disappointing son's ego. The knowledge didn't soften my anger, it focused it. This wasn't just a financial crime. It was a soul-deep betrayal, a perversion of fatherhood itself. I slipped away unnoticed, returning to the living room just as they did. Their faces were flush with victory. Find your glasses. Dear, my mother asked sweetly. No, I said, meeting her gaze. But I found exactly what I was looking for. I smiled. A tight, controlled expression that felt like a mask of ice. I'll be in touch after I speak with the trust. I drove back to Chicago that night. The hum of the highway, a soothing counterpoint to the chaotic symphony of betrayal in my mind. For the next few days, I was silent. I let them wait. I let them marinate in their smug certainty, picturing them checking their bank accounts, anticipating the arrival of the capital that would fund their final act of treachery against me. My silence, I knew, would be more unnerving to them than any angry outburst. I did not present their ambitious plan to the Veritas Trust. There was no need. The trust had already made its decision. On Wednesday morning, a sleek, black courrier, car, the kind that delivers sensitive legal documents, pulled up in front of the gilded page. My mother, father, and Leo were not served with a lawsuit or a demand for money. They were served with a single unfeminator, thick envelope bearing the crisp, embossed logo of a top-tier Chicago law firm. Inside was not a negotiation, it was a notification. A multipage document, written in the cold, precise language of corporate law, that detailed their fate. It began by referencing Article 9, Section B of the trust agreement they had so carelessly signed 3 years prior. It went on to outline, with damning specificity, the evidence of gross mismanagement, citing the ledger provided by Mr. Fivequive/ and the Palm, Arthur Miller. It detailed the pattern of embezzlement, listing the dates and amounts of Leo's unreceipted cash withdrawals and payments to the fraudulent graphic design firm. The final paragraph was the kill shot. It stated that, effective immediately, the Veritas Trust was invoking its contractual right to assume full, unilateral ownership and operational control of the Gilded Page bookstore, its associated assets, and all property held within. The document was signed by the trustee for the Veritas Trust. My signature, clear and unwavering. Their collapse was not loud and explosive, but a quiet, implosive implosion of their own self-delusion. My father called my lawyer, blustering and threatening, and was met with a calm, dispassionate recitation of the facts. My mother called me, weeping hysterically, alternating between pleas and accusations. I didn't answer. Leo sent a barrage of texts, each one more pathetic than the last, culminating in a disparity. You can't do this to me. The store is my life. He was right. It was his life. A life I had been funding. And the funding was now cut off. I didn't sell the bookstore. That would have been an ending. A simple amputation. My architectural instinct was not to demolish, but to redesign, to salvage the foundation and build something sound and true upon it. The following Saturday, I drove back to Wisconsin. I walked into the Gilded Page not as a visitor, but as the owner. The bell on the door chimed. The same sound from the recording, but this time it sounded like a declaration of a new era. I found Leo in the back office, frantically trying to shred documents. He looked up, his face a mess of panic and pathetic defiance. "You can't be here," he stammered. "Actually, I can," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. "You, however, cannot. You're fired, Leo, for theft. Mr. Miller has already boxed up your personal effects. I suggest you take them and leave before I decide to forward his ledger to the district attorney." He crumbled, the fight draining out of him, leaving only the hollow shell of a man who had never had to stand on his own. I met my parents at their house that evening. They looked old and defeated. I didn't shout. I didn't recriminate. I simply laid out the new architecture of their lives. "The Gilded Page is no longer your concern," I told them. "It is my business now. However, you will not be left with nothing. From the store's profits, you will receive a monthly stipend. It will be enough to cover your mortgage on this house and your basic living expenses. It will not be enough for luxuries. There will be no more new bracelets. No more country club dinners. It is a pension, not a prize. It is conditional upon your complete and total non-interference in the running of the bookstore." My last meeting was with Mr. Miller. I found him in the rare books section, gently dusting a first edition of The Great Gatsby. His face was etched with worry, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. "Mr. Miller," I said, getting straight to the point. "I would like you to assume the role of general manager of the Gilded Page. Effective immediately. I am also transferring a 10% ownership stake in the business to your name. Your loyalty was to my grandparents' legacy, and that is a debt I intend to honor." The old man's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in a long time, the bookstore was in the hands of someone who truly loved it. The final chapter was quiet. It was the hard, slow work of rebuilding. Under Mr. Miller's guidance, and with my remote oversight, the bookstore began to thrive. We didn't add a trendy coffee bar. We restored the original tin ceiling and invested in a proper archival system for the rare books. We didn't host influencer poetry slams. We started a children's story hour and a book club for seniors. We honored the legacy instead of chasing trends. My family adapted to their new reality with a bitter, sullen acceptance. The stipend arrived on time each month. A quiet reminder of the new order. The revenge wasn't in their ruin, but in their forced responsibility. The true victory wasn't in taking the bookstore from them, but in saving it for them. And from them, I had protected their legacy from their own worst impulses. I had taken their broken, corrupt structure and redesigned it to be sound, honest, and enduring. It was the most difficult and most satisfying project of my life. Sometimes the foundations of what we believe to be true are built on lies. Tearing them down is terrifying, but it's the only way to build something that will truly last. If you've ever had to reconstruct a part of your own life to make it honest, share your experience in the comments below. Your story of finding strength in the truth could be the blueprint someone else needs. Remember to like and subscribe, because every act of brave reconstruction deserves to be seen.